Maya says, when do we start transitioning from doing a lot of single reps of movements, for example, toes to bar, chest to bar, even things like barbell cycling, into putting more numbers together? Is it trial and error? Is it experimenting when we train? Thank you. So what Maya is talking about here is one of our laws of strategy, which is to try and do short sets with short rests and to try and minimize eccentrics. So doing singles on toes to bar can be a great strategy because you're still meeting all the criteria and you can just keep moving along at a consistent pace. But the question becomes, when do you go from those singles or those smaller sets, if we extrapolate this out, when do we go from that point to then trying to do bigger sets? How do we know that we're ready? Firstly, a lot of people struggle with pacing strategies when it comes to bodyweight gymnastic movements, barbell movements. But when you look at something monostructural, an easy type of exercise, something like running maybe, people inherently know that if you're going to run 5Ks, you shouldn't start at a sprint, that you should pace yourself over the 5 kilometers. So we inherently have this built-in knowledge of here's how we should pace with something simple like running. When it gets a little bit more complex, and particularly when we introduce new movements, so we're doing multiple movements into the same training session or into the same event, people start to get a little confused and start to lose the pacing. So let's compare something like toes to bar and a big set of toes to bar to something like running. When you're running, your stride rate, the number of steps you take per minute, is going to start to reduce as time increases. So if you're sprinting, you'll have a very high stride rate. As you start to slow down, that stride rate may also start to slow, particularly with people who haven't worked on maintaining a good, even cadence. The same thing has to happen if you're doing sets of toes to bar. The longer a set is, or the more reps that you have in front of you, the more you have to pace them and break them down. If you don't have many reps in front of you, then you can string them together because we're working with different energy systems and different thresholds. The whole idea here is that we're trying to not hit the wall. And this comes down to maximum sustainable pace. So if I was to answer this question, when do we start to change it? When do we go from singles or small sets into bigger sets? It comes down to you finding your maximum sustainable pace. What is the fastest pace, in this case, the fastest cycle rate that you can maintain for however long you're required to maintain them for? Now, as the size of the set increases, it's more important for you to keep the break short. As the size of the set decreases, it's more important for you to do bigger sets. So let's look at, for example, 50 toes to bar for time. If you're doing 50 toes to bar for time, it may be better for you to be doing these in sets of 1, 2, or 3. If you're doing 40 toes to bar for time, maybe you can hold sets of 4. If you're doing 30 toes to bar for time, maybe you can go sets of 5. 20 toes to bar for time, maybe you could do these in 3 sets, so maybe you go 7, 7, 6. And if you've got 10 toes to bar for time, you can do it in an unbroken set of 10. Now, it's important to note here that we've got very different strategy based on different lengths of workout, or in this case, on different lengths of set, on different rep schemes. Very different strategies. And that's the thing, you need to be able to adjust your strategy. Just like you would run at a different pace for a 100-meter sprint, a 1K run, a 5K run, or a marathon. There's a very different pace there. You have to be able to adjust based on the amount of work that you have to be doing. So you need to have the self-awareness to know when to be able to push and is not going to have a negative impact on either that exercise or the exercises that it's coupled with. You have to know when you should be able to push and when you need to be able to hold it back. And yes, this does come down to a process, as you've mentioned, of experimenting with it, of knowing yourself, of trying to do bigger sets and seeing if you can hold on. Now, of course, this is only of benefit to you if you are going to measure and record this and then look back at these results. Your body is a science experiment. You are your own petri dish. You apply a stimulus to this petri dish and you see what grows. You try doing big unbroken sets, you see what grows, you see what becomes of that, and you make a note and you record it and then you revisit this. And in time, you'll start to get a really good picture of what that curve of performance looks like, where you know that if I've got 5 rounds and each round with a few other movements contains 15 toes to bar, this is what I should be doing. If it's 10 rounds of 5 toes to bar, this is what I should be doing. So for every eventuality that can start to rear its head, you can look at this is what my strategy will probably be. But it does come down to experimentation and recording. Now, of course, in training, it is important to also push the pace as well, find that line of failure. And sometimes we will intentionally push you to a point of failure with these movements, not only so you can learn from it, but also because there are certain physiological adaptations. Now note, this isn't something that you always do. It's definitely not a good idea to always go hard early, thinking that because you're working harder, you'll get more fitness out of it, because then you're not training the correct energy systems. So don't always do this, but I will occasionally program things where it's max unbroken reps of a movement, and that will be interval based. In this, you expect a massive drop off in your ability here. So let's say you're going max unbroken toes to bar, then a minute rest for 3 rounds. You may go first set 25 reps, second set 15, third set 7. It can drop off that quickly. What we're doing there is trying to train as many of those motor units, which are those nerves which tell the muscle fibers to fire, as possible. So there, the intent, the training intent is to do that. But in most cases, you want to be looking at pacing in training, both to develop those energy systems, but also to improve that self-awareness.